right. So welcome to this week's Times Talk. Today we're going to be talking about fake news, because fake news is all around us. It's on social media, on websites, news channels, radios, newspapers, and it's been around for a long time. It's just that we've developed more and more technology to communicate and share information, and that can sometimes dilute the way that we share information and the quality of the information. So it's our job as individuals to have a critical eye for the information that we consume and the information that we spread to others. I wanted to share findings from a recent Pew study. So this was a survey done in December of 2016, and it says that a majority of Americans say that fake news has caused some confusion about basic facts of current events, with 64% of the respondents saying that it caused a great deal of confusion and 24% saying that it caused some confusion. So that's a total of 88% of people surveyed said that they're confused about what is just the basic facts of news. Yet, at the same time, the majority of Americans are confident in their ability to recognize fake news. So those two survey responses are a little bit contradictory in the fact that we're very confident. 39% said they were very confident in their ability to recognize fake news, and 45% of the respondents said they were somewhat confident in their ability. So even though it causes confusion, we're not really sure or confident that we can claim what is fake and what is real when it comes to the news that we consume. So to get us started, I decided that we're going to play a little game just to get us warmed up and get our minds thinking about what goes through our thought process when we see a news headline. We'll also see an image and part of a story, and then we'll also be able to reveal a source. So we'll just go through a couple of these as a warm-up activity. So here's a news article that says the Pope gave a TED Talk and asked tech companies to do better. So we have a picture of the Pope, and it's talking about this year's annual TED conference in Vancouver, and Pope Francis is on the schedule, and our source is TheVerge.com. Any ideas who thinks it's real? Who thinks it's fake? Okay, so we have more fake. No, sorry, that was actually a news article from The Verge. The Verge is a tech site of the Vox Media News Group.
What made it a non-fake article? That it was
Um,
that the organization that published it actually exists?
I mean that the fact that this is just a website that put it together, but they've qualified it. I bet if we dug deeper, we could verify it.
Mm-hmm.
They just have these news articles at random.
Okay, so you verified that the story is real. That's what makes it not fake.
That's what this website is doing, yes. But they're trying to at least train the eye. What you see, just quick glances of headlines and news stories and the source itself. So we have the next one of the new Google Companion Nano Chip, tracks your baby's life and auto-posts to social media pages. So we have Google's revolutionary advertising platform. Here's a photo of our nano chip. And our source is empirenews.net. How many hands for real? How many hands for fake? Okay.
Fakes have it.
Fakes have it. Have we ever heard of Empire News? Maybe not. And in the article, they don't mention the Google CEO, whose name would be very easy to get and reference in an article. So this is just an idea or a way to show just some quick things that we can keep our eyes open for, both photos, headlines, and just basic facts that are in news articles. And then looking at the source itself. So Factitious was kind of created just to create the general awareness. It may not be the in-depth what is fake news, but that's what we hope to get to today. Of what we can do as individuals to dive even deeper than what this game and this website has been created with our hype of fake news. We hear it all around us every day. What can we do as individuals to dive deeper into these tactics of fighting fake news. So we have our New York Times article. They've addressed the issue quite a bit. They recently referenced a study that talks about fighting fake news. The tactics mentioned include limiting the arguments that support misinformation, encouraging scrutiny, which is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today, and then presenting new information to replace, basically, when you're saying that's fake news, as fake news because, and what else can come along with that. So I'll pass it off to Nathan.
All right, guys, my name is Nate Elwood. I'm the instruction librarian here at Forsyth, and I'm going to start off actually with a story. So last April, I was at my fiance's family home for Easter. That's her over there. Wave, honey.
I thought you were married.
Soon enough. During the evening, her aunt started talking about a story that she was reading on Fox News. It alleged, as you can see here, that a married couple in Mississippi seeking IVF treatment for infertility discovered that they were in fact brother and sister, twins separated at birth. And they cited this from the Sun. Now this seemed a little far-fetched to me, so I decided to do a little bit of digging. So first, I looked at the Sun article that the Fox News article quoted. And for those of you who don't know, The Sun is a publication from the UK. It is also owned by Fox parent company News Corp, so it's an affiliated publication. In their article, which basically said the same stuff as the Fox article, they claimed the original source of this story was a local publication called the Mississippi Herald. Now, though it wasn't linked on the Sun article, I did manage to find the original article from the Herald. It took a little bit of searching, though. A Google search for the Mississippi Herald showed almost no online presence for this publication aside from their website. And in fact, what I did find quite a lot of was evidence of a publication that has gone on since the 1950s, the Mississippi Sun Herald. So eventually I did find the original article, and this is it here. And I apologize for the orientation of it. I took these on my phone when I was first doing this. And the more I looked at this article, the more struck out at me as being a little odd. The couple, for instance, was not named. That's not necessarily unusual, but neither was the doctor that was interviewed. Neither was the town that this supposedly took place in. There was essentially no corroborating or identifying information to be had. And if in fact you look right here, there wasn't even a byline for this story. No author was credited with it. So then I started looking at the Mississippi Herald website, and I quickly discovered that no articles on it traced back further than March of that year. So nothing on here was more than a month old. And then there was the matter of the headline story on the front page. Florida man caught having sex with horse at Mississippi ranch claims it seduced him. Those were words you were not thinking you were going to hear today. Now, if you haven't already guessed it, it turned out that the Mississippi Herald was a fake news website. It had been developed just within the last few months. I sent an email to Fox that evening, and the next day woke up to find this headline. Story about married couple discovering they were twins during IVF appears to be fake.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Impact.
I like to think so. Now, I start out with this story for a few reasons. It's not just to brag. But first, it shows how easy it is to be suckered in by fake news. None of the people who were sharing this, the people at Fox News, the people at my fiance's house, none of these were unintelligent people. But the fake news trap is an easy one to fall into. It demonstrates this story how we can be on guard against fake news when we encounter it in the wild and prevent falling for it with a little bit of due diligence. And also, I do share it because it's funny. But the story of fake news isn't always so amusing. In fact, the world of fake news would be a pretty grim one to live in. In this alternate universe, presidential candidates have their opponents murdered. Pizza parlors engage in human trafficking. And the Spaniards keep sinking our battleships. Now, I bring this one up because a lot of people believe that this is a modern problem, somehow rooted in millennials or in our social media habits. But the truth is that fake news has always been a problem. We haven't always referred to it by that term, but it's always been out there. It's a natural inclination for us to want to believe information that confirms our existing notions. And that inclination has been taken advantage of by opportunists for literally as long as we've had news. Just another example from the past here that I really like. In 1835, a New York newspaper called The Sun, no relation to the UK publication, purported that life existed on the moon in the form of bat-winged people and giant beavers with elaborate cities. Now, the Great Moon Hoax, as it later came to be called, was reprinted across the country and dramatically increased the Sun's circulation, maybe up to threefold from what it had been before this. And fake news isn't just relegated to the modern day or the distant past. I want to be really clear about that. In the 1950s, the Red Scare convinced the nation that communists lurked around every corner. In the 1980s, a satanic panic blamed Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal music for murders and suicides. So even though we'll be primarily talking about the fake news phenomenon within a digital framework, within the modern day context, I want to be really upfront that none of this is meant to create nostalgia for the days of Walter Cronkite. That era had plenty of its own media problems, but right now we're here to focus on our modern problems and how to engage with them in a modern context, and how we can become better information consumers within that context. So in order to be better information consumers, we need to learn how to properly evaluate information and engage with our sources. And this is a skill that's useful not just in academic careers, but also just in day-to-day life, in the news environment that we exist in. So back to my general theme, what is fake news? Now, this is a broad term, it's hard to pin down, and it is often misused. So it pays us to be specific when we talk about this. So, according to media professor Melissa Zimdars of Merrimack College, there are actually 4 broad categories of fake news. Category 1 is fake, false, or regularly misleading websites and memes. Generally, they're shared through Facebook and other social media. Usually these rely on provoking a sense of outrage or other strong emotion. They'll use distorted headlines, dubious and decontextualized information, and they are meant to generate likes, shares, and profits generally. A couple different examples of these. For instance, I brought up near the beginning an article that was being shared during the 2016 election through Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. Where a publication calling itself the Denver Guardian purported that Secretary Clinton, then running for president, had a DNC staff member murdered when that person threatened to expose secrets of her campaign. This spread far and wide through a variety of different social medias, but as it turned out, not only was the story fake, but so was the publication. There was no Denver Guardian. It never had been. And it got so bad that an actual newspaper from the area, the Denver Post, felt the need to publish a story saying, this doesn't exist. Stop sharing it on Facebook. Another example of this category 1. Memes like this one. So this is a meme that was shared by Donald Trump in 2015, and it purports that blacks kill 81% of white homicide victims. It claims to get this information from the Crime Statistics Bureau of San Francisco. If you guys are noticing a pattern up to this point, it will be unsurprising to you that not only is this statistic wildly inaccurate, but there is no Crime Statistics Bureau of San Francisco. There's no such organization, either government or private. Doesn't exist at all. So this is what we most often refer to, this category, when we talk about fake news. There are some other categories to deal with. Category 2 is websites that circulate misleading or potentially unreliable information. And this can take a few different forms. For instance, you can have well-funded and organized think tanks like the Heartland Institute, which was originally established to essentially obscure the fact that smoking caused cancer. They were out there to say, no, smoking's not that bad for you. They exist to this day and use similar tactics of obfuscation in spreading their messages. Now, what I want to emphasize with this category, though, category 2, is that these aren't always necessarily malicious or intentional. This is misleading or potentially unreliable information, but that doesn't always mean that these are bad guys. For instance, this is a website called Natural News. It purports to be the world's top news source on natural health. Much of what you'll find on here are things that are anti-vaccination, anti-GMO, generally counter to accepted scientific opinions. In these cases, I want to emphasize that these people might not be necessarily trying to fool anyone. I truly believe that many people 100% believe that vaccines cause autism or that GMO crops are out to murder us all. Those things might not be true, but these people will spread them, and they'll spread through Facebook and other social media outlets just as quickly as deliberately manufactured fake news. Category 3, websites which sometimes use clickbaity headlines, social media descriptions, and other kind of outrageous or outlandish headlines or imagery. These are, before the digital context, these would be your tabloid journalism. So this would be ones such as the Huffington Post or the New York Post or Breitbart, where the actual story you find in the content of the article might be actually comparatively very staid and boring, but the headlines that they use, the images that accompanies it, all of these are, just like other types of fake news, meant to generate a response, usually one of outrage. So this is just one that I give as an example here. U.S. proposes giving wind farms 30-year permit to kill eagles. So you've got that headline right there, and then you've got this beautiful national symbol pictured below. And I want to emphasize with this is that the story below it is actually presented very fairly and in a way where if you actually read it, you would understand that that's kind of a misinterpretation here, where actually what is happening is that we accept with wind farms that there is a certain chance that eagles and other birds may be killed or injured by those turbines. It's not that the farmers are going out to shoot our eagles and other rare birds, but there may be a level of collateral damage. This is not a permit for them to, like I said, go out there and gun the birds down, but rather it protects them from legal repercussions if a bird was to be accidentally killed or injured by their turbines. But that doesn't get clicks. That doesn't, as they say, sell papers. So this is a tactic that the information might not necessarily be fake, but you want to be at least aware of it and actually read the article before you immediately just share it through Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media you use. And then there's category 4, satire and comedy sites, which can offer important critical commentary on politics, on national events, on society, but do have the potential to be shared as actual or literal news. So these are The Onion, Reductress, the Borowitz Report. Generally, these are fairly easy to spot, but as I said before, it is easy enough for them to just be shared without really looking at the information that is presented by them. Now, another thing I want everyone to kind of keep in mind when I talk about this is that fake news sources don't necessarily fall under just one of these categories. A fake news site, one that is deliberately involved in the production of fake news, could easily have articles where they have partially correct information with outrageous headlines blended right in there with articles with entirely incorrect information. And this is actually a tactic we see quite a bit. Now, another thing that you guys might be already thinking about is that there is another usage of the term fake news that has entered our current lexicon, another meaning of the phrase. So I call that category 5, stuff I don't like, things that disagree with me. So this is when politicians or rival media outlets will condemn as fake news the outlets that they disagree with. You've almost all certainly heard this use of the phrase. But where does it actually come from? Why is this, what we think of now when we hear the phrase fake news? Well, as I said before, we've always had fake news. But the term itself has only been around since maybe the 18th century, 19th century. And information professionals have used that term to refer to usually some version of the previous 4 categories since that time. But in studying it, in 2016, we started to notice that a lot of fake news was being created for a specific purpose. That it was being created and shared online to influence the course of the national election. This became a news story in and of itself, became part of the national conversation, and this threatened to delegitimize certain causes and candidates. It was at this point that far-right outlets like Breitbart seized upon the term and started twisting it into a label that they applied to mainstream media outlets that they opposed. Now, then candidate Donald Trump capitalized on this. It became a staple of his political messaging to attack the media as fake news in order to minimize their impact. And he was not subtle about this. He attacked journalists at his rallies. He criticized them personally during interviews. He claimed again and again and again that established media outlets were illegitimate and out to get him. And in fact, if you go on his Twitter today, just this morning, he advanced a new claim that NBC News was fake news and should have their license taken away. Now, unfortunately, this tactic has been devastatingly effective. People in positions of authority, educators even, have told me that they believe that journalists are, by and large, dishonest. I have friends who work at local papers, small town publications, who find cries of fake news in their comment sections and in their inboxes whenever they say something that someone in their community dislikes. And this kind of tactic is very dangerous because it undermines our real, trustworthy news sources. It's also very simply, I'm going to be blunt about this, not intellectually sound. Journalists are people who have received a specialized education, who see a mission in their career to report the truth, and who take generally a great deal of pride in the product of their labor. Criticizing the mainstream media and journalists in general is like saying that all doctors are dishonest or all teachers. So let's talk very briefly about what fake news isn't. Fake news is not the mainstream media. It isn't the New York Times, it isn't CNN, it isn't NBC. It isn't editorials or opinion pieces. If a publication has done its job correctly, these will be clearly marked and separate from journalistic content. They do not reflect the views of the journalists. And finally, honest mistakes are not fake news. At the beginning of this, I talked about an instance where Fox repeated an actual fake news story. But they didn't create that, and the next day, they printed a retraction. Mistakes can and will happen in the normal news cycle, and it is a normal part of journalistic standards to own up to that and then move on. So now that we know a little bit more about what fake news is and isn't, we still need to know, why do these fake news outlets, why do these appear in the first place? And from our research, we generally identify 3 primary reasons that fake news is created and disseminated: profit, politics, and propaganda. Profit is by far the most common motivation. Now, just like with tabloid journalism before it, yellow journalism before that, The outrageous and outlandish titles, images, and themes of much of our fake news serve primarily to generate likes, clicks, subscriptions, and other sources of revenue. This is the first story that I brought up, the Mississippi Herald. They were trying to generate revenue through ad sources. People click on that link because it's so odd, so outlandish, they want to read more about it, and then they get advertisement revenue. A bigger example of this, a 2016 report from The Guardian uncovered 150 English language news sites coming from just one town in Macedonia. Many of these featured deliberately outrage-provoking titles like "Hillary's illegal email just killed its first American spy." And members of this community would produce hundreds of these fake news stories per day from a variety of different websites, a variety of different outlets, and spread them through various social media, thereby earning money through advertising networks. Well, politics is another major factor in a lot of these stories. Fake news is often generated to feed into a political movement or to manufacture feelings of outrage. Now, this is usually tied into a profit motive, such as in a case of a website like InfoWars, but not always. Sometimes the political goal is the primary agenda. And this motivation is deeply tied into the final one that I mentioned here, which I call propaganda here, but might be better phrased as destabilization. So when I talk about this one, this is when foreign actors or foreign powers use fake news as a weapon to confuse, anger, and divide a populace. This is a favorite tool of Russia, who have generated fake news to help foment unrest or sway elections in several different countries. In the Ukraine, for instance, they are so inundated with fake news from Russia meant to destabilize the region that they have an entire national televised news program dedicated to debunking the latest fake news stories of this week. This is a weekly publication, and every week they have to say, this is not true, this is not true, this is not true, and back up how they found that out. So just like the different types of fake news can often intertwine, so can these motivations. A fake news source could be created for any one of these causes, or for all three. Now you're probably wondering, what's the big deal? Is fake news really such a problem? Do people really have such a hard time noticing it for itself? Cindy mentioned, what was the statistic? How many people think that they can notice it themselves?
Let's see, a total of 84% people are confident.
84% are confident that they can see this when they find it. Now, is that true? Not necessarily. This graphic shows the massive engagement that some fake news stories saw during the past presidential election. In fact, on social media, fake news actually outpaced the real thing in terms of engagement during that news cycle. Why is that? Why is it so easy for us to fall for this and share this? Well, believe it or not, this cartoon pretty much sums up the reason why. It's a concept called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is our tendency to believe information is credible if it conforms to our pre-existing belief system, or not credible if it doesn't conform. And we live in an age where nearly 40% of adults get their news online. But according to a Columbia University study, nearly 60% of links posted to social media are never clicked on. People aren't actually reading them before they share them. We take a look, we see a headline, we nod at it, we share it, and then we move on. And the fact is that this has real consequences. Fake news has swayed votes. Fake news has altered the opinions and messaging of politicians. And fake news has even incited violence. Has anyone here heard of Pizzagate? Haven't. This is a fake news story, I mentioned it near the beginning, that started circulating during the 2016 presidential election. It started on social blogging sites like 4chan and Reddit, and it alleged that a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., Comet Pizza, was engaged in human trafficking of children. To grab even more attention and to get a wider audience, It also included connections to Secretary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta, who the story alleged was the ringleader of the whole sordid operation. Now, the story was, of course, a complete fabrication. There was not a shred of truth to it. But this didn't stop people from going online and harassing the restaurant, harassing its employees. Even bands who had played songs at the restaurant were not immune to this kind of online bullying. And this all came to a head in December 2016 when a man from North Carolina took an AR-15 rifle, drove across 3 states, and entered the establishment, firing 3 shots. All of this he did in an attempt to investigate the situation and, if possible, free the hostages. Nobody was hurt in this particular incident, but it demonstrates how dangerous this phenomenon of fake news could become if left unchecked. And that's why it is our responsibility as engaged citizens to be able to identify and weed out fake news when we see it. So now the big question, how do we do that? First of all, we don't do it with an infographic. Some of you may have seen this particular image or something like it floating around social media. This chart claims to distinguish quality news sources, kind of at the center top, from fake ones or less reliable sources, which you find here at the bottom and off to the side, this side being liberal, this side being conservative. And I want to be clear that things like this do not help to stop the spread of fake news. Keep in mind, all of us are at some point guilty of our own confirmation bias. So frequent consumers of sources that this graphic claims are untrustworthy. Say these ones here, maybe I just really like USA Today. They'll dismiss it entirely, almost immediately. This is trying to sway me against my beliefs. This is propaganda. This is lies. This is fake news. Whereas, on the other hand of that, consumers of sources that this praises, these ones up here, The Atlantic, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, they might ignore the unscientific nature of the work. This is a source that does not explain its methodology. It refers to some of the sources on here as basic AF. This is not necessarily a credible source to be trusting, but if I read one of those all the time up there, well, look how smart I am. Look how trustworthy my news sources are. And so I don't look at this critically. Others kind of like this, like News Prism, can be equally misleading because they present bias as a binary, where unbiased is good, top of the chart, USA Today, and biased is bad. Bad Nation, bad Huffington Post. But this does little to evaluate the actual quality of the reporting. Just an example here, National Review is right down here with The Blaze and Breitbart on the conservative side, very bad. I would much rather someone reads the National Review, which has a level of intellectual honesty and rigor to its reporting that these sources just simply don't have. On the other hand of this, USA Today, a great publication for general news, what's going on in the world. It does not, however, reach the same depth of investigative reporting or kind of quality of the publication as, say, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. So it's important to remember that broad characterizations and hard and fast rules won't solve the fake news problem. So what do we do instead? Well, instead of going with a gut feeling or our personal validity view of the validity of a source, try engaging with it critically. Now, luckily, all of you already have a set of tools that lets you do this. And there's something that I'm willing to bet that most of you learned as far back as middle school. Who, what, where, when, and why. The 5 W's are actually a great tool for helping you to evaluate information resources. So let's just go through them one by one. Who? Who wrote this? Can you even tell? You saw at the beginning, there was no byline for the Mississippi Herald article. In the case that there was a byline, can I confirm that the author is an authority in the topic? If it's a science article, is this someone who generally writes scientific articles or reports on scientific topics? Credentials are important. First-hand accounts are also important. Most importantly, of the who questions, who stands to benefit if you believe this source? What? What kind of resource is this? Is it a scholarly research article? Is it a newspaper article? Is it an advertisement? What kind of information does it present? Also another what question, does what it says, does the content accurately match up with what you know about the topic or what you can confirm from other sources? When? How up-to-date is the information? We like up-to-date information. We like to be in the know. But looking at a question of how soon after the event took place was this published, we have seen false reports and misinformation come out shortly after major events like mass shootings, where people prey upon this instinct in us to seize upon the latest information. So how up-to-date do you need the information to be? Where? What is the source? How does the information differ from source to source? Where are you getting it? Also, where is the information in relation to the structure of the website? Is it on the front page where everyone can see it, or is it buried somewhere within the content? Why? The final question. What is the purpose of the source? Is it trying to share facts? Is it trying to convince you of something? Is it trying to sell you something? Is it trying to entertain you? Why are you looking at this source? Are you looking for the best source of information? Or are you feeding into your own confirmation bias and just looking for the things that agree with you? And asking these questions is going to go a long way to helping you determine the validity of a source. But there's some other tips and tricks that I will recommend for you guys. When examining a source online, here's a few things that you should just kind of get into the hang of doing when you're looking at them. Kind of going along with the who question from before. Check the credentials. Like I asked before, is the author specialized in the field that the article is concerned with? Usually with established journalists and reporters, you can find them on LinkedIn or do a quick Google search to see what else they've written, to see if they can speak on the subject with authority and accuracy. Read the About Us section. This is a good one to just kind of keep in mind. Does the resource have one to begin with? The Mississippi Herald, for instance, did not have an About Us. They were only a month old, they weren't a real news site, and even though fake news sites or misleading sites can have About Us sections, if a site doesn't have an About Us, doesn't explain what their mission is, doesn't explain who they are, that's generally a red flag about the authority of that source. Check out the sources. When an article cites sources, it is good to investigate those. Sometimes official sounding associations can actually be biased think tanks like the Heartland Institute, or represent only a fringe view of a large group of people. If you can't find the sources that they use to back up the article, read about it in other websites, other newspapers, other publications to see if you can confirm what is being said here. Interrogate URLs. This is an important one in the digital context. We see quite a bit of domain manipulation these days, where you'll see, for instance, abcnews.com.co and other mirror websites, which look like the websites that they are purporting to be, have similar URLs, but are just a little bit different, and spread fake news stories rather than their real contemporaries. Reverse search an image. If you're looking at a meme that you might share on Facebook or on Twitter or Reddit, and you're not quite sure about it, like the meme that I showed you near the start, Use a reverse image search on Google to discover where it originally came from. You might be surprised at what you find out. And then just finally, two things that I really want to leave you with. Suspect the sensational and judge hard. If what you're reading seems too good to be true or too weird or too reactionary, there's a good chance that it is those things. And that's when you want to start investigating and start following through on these other procedures to figure out, is this telling me the truth? Now, if you want to do more and you want to help get rid of fake news entirely, you can help with that. First step is to find news sources that you trust. Evaluate them carefully and maintain an awareness of your own bias and theirs. But then avoid sharing stories that you can't trust or verify. Remember that many fake news stories seek revenue to keep going, and they get that revenue through your shares, through your likes, through your clicks. If you don't click or share, you help to starve the beast. On the inverse of that, support the sources that you trust. One of the reasons that fake news is so popular is that it is much, much cheaper and easier to produce than the real thing. If you want to support quality journalism, the best advice I can give you is to support the sources you trust. Subscribe to your local or national newspapers and magazines.